which was started by Travis Kalanick, who's a founder of Uber. When he left Uber, he started a company called Cloud Kitchens. The company is actually, the umbrella company is called City Storage Systems. The goal for the company was to build infrastructure to enable on-demand delivery of physical goods. This is before COVID. And the company has been wildly successful. I joined to rethink construction and rethink how they approach building of smart infrastructure. So I was there as a VP for hardware for some time. Then automotive industry came calling back. So most recently, I was at Rivian as executive vice president for manufacturing engineering, construction engineering, and capital procurement, helping launch 3 vehicles. And most recently, about 2 years ago, decided to make a jump from being an operator to being an investor. I'd always been interested, and I knew I would be doing investments long term. And the opportunity came earlier than I thought it would. And so 2 years ago, joined Eclipse Ventures. This is where I am today as a general partner. Eclipse, we are a 9-year-old firm, so relatively young. But I like to say we invest at the intersection of bits and atoms. And our thesis is really simple. 80% of the global GDP is the physical industries. And if we believe that if you really want to have a positive dent in the world, you need to focus on the physical industries. So we invest and partner with founders who are building technology to transform the physical industries. So that's everything from biotech, manufacturing, robotics, semiconductor, networking, you name it, it's pretty broad. We invest anywhere from pre-seed to Series B, Series C companies, write checks between 2 to 100 million. We're mostly invested in North America. We have presence in Europe and in Israel. And obviously, I'm trying to working with E to find opportunities on the continent for us to make our maiden investment. And that's a bit about my career.
That's amazing. Thank you so much for that story. I feel like you should tell them what university you went to, so they know it's not just the abroad universities that get.
Yeah. I went to Jomo Kenyatta University, JKUAT, it's called in Kenya. It's a pretty good university.
Exactly. Fantastic university in Kenya.
Yep.
So let's go next to Dr. Okey. Dr. Okey, are you there? Dr. Okey?
Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me?
We can hear you perfectly. We can hear you perfectly.
So following the same pattern, I am Nigerian, started life in Nigeria, grew up there, went to college, just like Charly went to college in Kenya, went to college in Nigeria, went to University of Nigeria, studied medicine. So I started life as a medical doctor, but decided very early on that I didn't want to be a medical doctor, and had the opportunity to join the firm that is known as Anderson, which was a firm of accountants and consultants back in the day in the 80s, late 80s. Joined them in 1988. Spent a few years with them in Lagos and London. London was very short, but it was part of my stay with them. Qualified as an accountant, then went to business school in the States and got into investment making. I joined Goldman Sachs for part of my training there, did a summer associate program with them, and then decided to focus on Africa as I was coming out of business school in 1994. Was lucky or fortunate to meet a gentleman who was raising a fund for South Africa. Well, South Africa, this was back when you have President Mandela as the president of South Africa, and now that whole renaissance, or so let's say, feel-good factor in South Africa. So we raised funding from the US to cross-border funds to invest into South Africa. And I was part of that group, did that for about 3 or 4 years. In 1997, 1998, came back and started African Capital Alliance with my former boss in Arthur Anderson, who had then retired. And we brought some other partners, and we've been investing across the continent, we raised a $35 million fund, and it's been raised 4 funds since then. So I really consider myself an investor. Not tech investor, not VC in the true sense. So that's why when I'm invited to meetings like this, I come to learn and to hang out. And Ian and I have shared a few platforms. This is one more this year. So I think it's good to be with you today. I should add a couple of
Absolutely.
things. I did have a chance to serve in government as a minister, and that's actually when I met Iyi. I served as the Minister of Industry, Trade and Investment in Nigeria for the first administration of President Buhari, 2015 to 2019. And then I should also say I'm very interested in, STEM education, and there's a STEM university that I'm working on with Iyi and others that we want to make. We call it the MIT of Africa, and we hope this university will really unlock some of the potential of our continent. I will stop there. Thank you.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you so much, Dr. Okey, for that. I'm going to go finally to the man I call Uncle Nick. I don't know how to call him any other way, but this is a very storied investor and also somebody who's just incredibly inspiring. So, Uncle Nick, you need to tell us your story.
All right, thank you. First of all, I thank you very much for the opportunity to be here with this group. You introduced me to Charly some time ago, so I happen to have met Charly a few times and I've gotten to know him a little bit, and wonderful to be on here with him. And Dr. Okey, I'm just meeting for the first time. Really excited to be able to share this panel with you. And thank you again for your kindness. I was born on a tiny little island in the Caribbean called Grenada. And, Grenada has a population of about 120,000 people. But there are some smaller islands off Grenada called the Grenadines. I was actually born on one of those islands. I was born on an island called Carriacou with a total population of about 7,000 people. And, I grew up mostly in Grenada. I left Grenada when I was about 14. We lived in Guyana, not Ghana, but Guyana in South America, and in Barbados, before I went on to Canada, which is where I did both my undergraduate and postgraduate studies at McMaster University and University of Waterloo. My background is in chemical engineering, chemistry, and material science, and I started my career at Intel. My first job at Intel, similar to Charly, I started off as a manufacturing engineer, a process engineer. And after 2 years, I moved into technology development, which is where I spent most of my time at Intel. I spent a total of 6 years there, so 2 years as a process engineer and 4 years in technology development, developing advanced process technologies for making semiconductor devices. And after 6 years, I left Intel, I have to say reluctantly to some extent, and became an entrepreneur. I was 28 years old or so, and became a founding member of a startup called Nchip, which turned out to be a very successful startup by most measures. After 5 years, Nchip was acquired by Flex. I then became the chief technology officer of Flex, and this is what most people know me in Silicon Valley for my accomplishments at Flex. I was part of the executive team that grew that company from about 150 million to 30 billion. And I manage a team of almost 20,000 people. I then left Flex. I became the chief executive officer of a semiconductor company called Aptina, which at one time was the world's largest producer of CMOS image sensors. And while I was doing that, I also co-founded a private equity firm called Riverwood Capital, which is still around today. It's now 15 years old and doing extremely well. We focus primarily in investments in the US and Latin America. And during the time I was there, we invested over $500 million in Latin America and have seen some major successes there in companies in Argentina and Brazil and others. But about 10 years ago, I decided I liked doing earlier stage stuff. So I co-founded Celesta Capital. And I did that because I really like working with founders. I like seeing ideas turn into businesses and businesses turn into bigger businesses. That is what motivates me. And so throughout my career, even when I was at Flex, I built some of the fastest growing businesses inside of Flex and started several businesses that grew to be over $1 billion in revenue in less than 5 years. And that's what excites me. And I'm excited about working with young startups to turn their ideas into big global businesses.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Uncle Nick. That's an amazing one. But you didn't say very much about Celesta, but we'll just.
Oh yeah, well I could say a little bit more about Celesta. So Celesta is a deep tech investor. We started Celesta based on the thesis that many of the greatest technological innovations are built on advancements in deep tech, which is materials, semiconductors, hardware, but that the industry 10 years ago were not focused much on that space. And so we decided to start Celesta, focusing specifically in the deep tech space, which is investing in companies that are developing businesses based on new innovations, kind of at the frontier of materials and hardware and semiconductors, and so, but not limited to that. There are three themes in which we invest. One is in companies that are developing platforms that we think are necessary for proliferating emerging applications. When new applications emerge, they have to be built on traditional platforms, but to get mass proliferation, oftentimes those platforms aren't cost effective enough, and you have to develop application specific platforms in order to drive mass proliferation. That's one area. Another theme is investing in companies that are transforming large existing industries. We believe that many of the large existing industries cannot meet the emerging needs of the global population. So things like construction, agriculture, even financial services, many of these industries just are not able to address today's needs and need to be transformed. And so we invest in companies that are doing that. And then the third area is at the intersection of biotech and high tech, where we believe there is need for significant transformation in the biotech industry, especially in developing countries where most of the world have been focused on making products that add convenience to people who already have access to medical services. We believe that most of the world is in need of access. And we believe you can solve that problem by leveraging some of the advancements from the high-tech industry into biotech. And we've been very successful in that space. We are currently investing out of our fourth fund. We're raising our fifth fund. And we've had very, very good results so far.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Uncle Nick. I'm going to ask one question to kick us off, which is, at some point in all your careers, you looked up and you realized that you were in rooms that the vast majority of people who typically look like us don't get into, right? The question I want to ask is, what did it take to get there? What do you think the top 2 or 3 things that got you to that point? What do you think they are? And maybe we'll start this time with Uncle Nick.
Well, I'm going to give an answer that may or may not turn out to be so profound. I've been in the tech industry for a long time. I started in the tech industry almost 40 years ago, and when I first came to Silicon Valley, I can tell you there were not a lot of Black people. In almost every meeting I went into, I was the only Black person. I remember giving a talk at a conference one time, and there were probably 1,000 people or so in that conference. And when I walked in, there were only 2 other Black people in the entire conference. So you just didn't see a lot of us. But let me start by saying that I am not going to pretend that I had a lot to do with the successes that I've had. I truly believe that I am where I am because God placed me where He wanted me to be and gave me the tools in order for me to be successful. And I know we don't have a lot of time to go into this, but for example, when I started at Intel, I have never applied for a job. I got the job at Intel because someone decided to do a resume for me when I was in graduate school, and another friend got a copy of that resume and handed it to an Intel recruiter, who then called me. And I did not return the calls. They called me 4 times and I never returned the call because I didn't even know why this Intel person was calling me. So I tried everything not to get that job, I would say, and I ended up with the job anyway. And so I can't take a lot of credit for a lot of this. But having said that, I would say one of the things that helped me to be successful, especially in my early days of my career, was my self-confidence. I had a lot of confidence in my ability, and I wasn't afraid to volunteer to take on some of the most complex problems that we were facing in the company at that time. And I often suggest to young people, especially young people, minorities, especially Black people, that you have to approach your job with a level of self-confidence. If you don't have confidence in yourself, it is difficult for other people to have confidence in you. So without that self-confidence, it's going to be hard for you to get the opportunities. And don't be afraid of failure, because I used to have people telling me, why are you volunteering to take on all these tough problems? What happens if it fails? You're going to look bad. And I said, why would I look bad? Nobody else is solving the problem anyway. So if I don't solve it, how am I any worse than anybody else? But I would say that self-confidence in my abilities and not being afraid to take on tough problems was one of the reasons for my success in the early part of my career. And I'll leave it for the early part for now.
Fantastic. How about you, Dr. Okey?
So, I mean, listening to Nick is fascinating because I am very sort of persuaded by faith, my faith journey as well, that the God factor makes a huge difference in the lives of people. My father was a clergyman, and I know that every change I've had to make, some of which are quite radical, like, moving from medicine to investment, so to accounting or professional service firm about Anderson, and then going on to Harvard Business School, and then the career I had from then on has been sort of, if you will, getting very important breaks in life, right? Breaks in life that you can't just ascribe, like Nick was saying, to because you are particularly brilliant. But having said that, I would say 2 or 3 things that are very practical that actually help. Faith being an anchor to all this. One is the quality of mentors you have, right? So if I look at what has worked for me, I've had some incredible mentors through my life. The gentleman that recruited me into Anderson, an American, and mentored me through my career, they eventually became my partner in founding African Capital Alliance. Dick Kramer, some of you, I mean, Inya, I don't know if you met him. You are a younger generation, but Dick was a legend at the time, right? I mean, but he's one of these guys that really mentored so many people, which is why I'm so committed to mentoring myself as well. Just that ability to have people who have been on the journey before you, who can provide wisdom, perspective, counsel, I think is very valuable. The other thing is just what I call, seizing opportunity. When you're given opportunity, you have to make the most of it. And you do get opportunities, like the parable of the talents in the Bible. When the thing is put in your hand, you have to give it your all, because I think that makes a big difference. You will get opportunity. And when you get that opportunity, whether it's in terms of your education, your training, your investing, your where you work and so on, I think that's, if I look back now, I would say one has been very fortunate in terms of making the most of the opportunities that God has given me or life has given me, in a way that you then, give it your best and you have no regrets. I always like to refer to my short time in public service. Well, it wasn't actually that short. My one time in public service, which was almost 4 years. But, I gave it my all. By the time I left, all the problems were not solved. But I like the fact that I certainly wanted to work with the likes of Iyinoluwa to make the most impact in terms of creating an enabling environment, which is something we had talked about for years. But the moment I was asked to go there, I knew that this was an opportunity and I'm not going to just monkey around answering minister. And then before I know it, I'm out of there. Yeah, so I think those would be my initial thoughts. Thank you.
Amazing. Thank you. Thank you so much. Charly.
Yeah, I completely agree with what Nick said and Dr. Okey. I think, I would summarize it in this, that saying that luck is when opportunity meets preparedness. I've been super lucky, but lucky in terms of opportunities, being where I am, the family, the stability I've had around me, the people I've had around me. But there's also the preparedness as well. And so, what does that mean? I think, like, when I look back, just like Dr. Okey said, where I've had opportunities, I've really put in a lot of work. Just seizing the opportunity, and that is just this unwillingness to compromise. Just focus, hard work, focus on being productive, but also improving yourself and challenging yourself. And when I look back, majority of my growth has been as a function of obviously the hard work I've just talked about, but also willingness to take risks, right? Some of the opportunities that, just practical examples. I was at Nissan, having what many would have called a stable career. When I joined Tesla, the last person I talked to at Tesla told me they had 6 months of runway left, right? Just telling me, hey, before you join, just know we have 6 months. But the thing that I optimized for was it was very clear to me in those 6 months, even if Tesla died, I would learn more than if I spent 6 years at Nissan. And so I made the jump, even though it was a bit scary, but I made the jump optimizing for learning versus stability. And to many people, look like a dumb move, but 7 years later, Tesla was bigger than the you know 10 or so companies, traditional automotive companies combined, and probably multiplied by 2. And so it was the right move. But it was the same thing when I left Tesla. It looked like a damn move going to cloud kitchens, and so on and so forth. So what I've always optimized for is sort of like learning, continuously challenging myself, and that has worked out. So that's a preparedness. And then you get lucky, opportunities come your way.
Fantastic. Those were amazing contributions. And something we talk about a lot. The need for you to be willing to take risks, to learn, and faith being the bedrock of some of these things being able to happen at all. So I'm going to start with you again, Charly. We'll go back. What would you say? As you think about your beginnings, right? You didn't start with an Ivy League degree, middle class family. You went to a Nigerian university, a Nairobi university. We wish you went to a Nigerian university, but we're so lucky. The Chekhov's team is protesting because they're from Nairobi. They don't want us to take their star. So now coming out of that and then playing on global stage, right? What would you say are the principles that kept you globally competitive? Because I think a lot of young people especially, would come out of a place like this and imagine that, because I went to school in Africa, those opportunities are for the people that went to Ivy Leagues. What kept you globally competitive? Like, what were the principles you adhered to be globally competitive, even though you were coming from a pretty small place?
Actually, I think it's a lot of what Nick said. Sort of like self-confidence. It's funny, like recently I actually gave a talk at MIT, and I was talking to the head of MIT, and I was saying, when I was coming to the US, I was not even in my vocabulary of options, so I didn't even know. So the answer, first of all, I didn't know that I was not getting an Ivy League education. I thought I was getting the best education, which I think I was. So I did not have that in sort of like inferiority complex. I came here super confident. And it didn't take long for me to actually understand that the education I got in Kenya was superior to what I was being exposed to here. But I was always focused on, I was actually a horrible student in the sense that, yes, I did well academically, but I never liked attending classes. And so I've always done sort of like self-study. So when I came to the US, I did that, right? I had high confidence in my ability to learn and pick up any new skills. And I applied myself in doing that, right? When I came to the US, I didn't know anything about computers. I bought books on computers. 6 months later, I was working in computer labs and things like that. I didn't know, I wanted to learn more about computers. I went and I worked at Dell and I learned how to build computers. So I just always had this practical sort of like approach to life. When I saw something I wanted to learn, I threw myself at it and I could see the results. And that kind of builds up. You set an objective, you work hard at it, you see some level of success, so you build this confidence. And so I kind of got used to, and we have this luxury that we don't appreciate as much. So we grow up in Africa and you see a president, a doctor that looks like you. And so to me, I never doubted that I could be any of these things that people call, success. When I joined Tesla, I never doubted myself that I could be a leader within Tesla, right? I think actually when people came talk to me and asked me, hey, how does it feel to be the only Black, leader at Tesla? That's when I actually stepped back to think about it. But it wasn't something that I was conscious about like every day. So I just went about my business. But I boil it down to the same things that we talked about. Is just super focused on growth, very, very intellectually curious and built on top of that. And then I surrounded myself with amazing, amazing founders and not founders, but mentors, sorry. And just also colleagues. I have very close friends who are like-minded, and those people influence you and challenge you on a day-to-day basis. And when I look back, their colleagues, there's actually a really good friend of mine from Guyana who I've been dying to introduce to Nick, went to the same school as Nick. Nick went to one of these prestigious schools in Guyana. If that friend,
I also went to the same school as Nick. That's like our all common.
So that's a common thread here. Nick is a common thread. So, but like if my friend and I never got together at early days at Tesla, we would probably have just sort of like averaged out in middle management and hadn't grown, but we challenge each other. So get good mentors, get good friends, make sure you're spending time with like-minded folks, and then challenge yourself.
That's amazing. That's great. Dr. Okey, I want to ask you about habits. What kind of habits did you develop, or have you seen as an investor, have you seen great founders develop that help them to be able to perform at a world-class level?
Great question. So just permit me to go back to that premise that Nick started us on. And the reason is that I'll tell you a story. So I had a friend growing up, right? I mean, just listening to Charly and others, it may well be that there are some parallels. When I was in university, I was, very playful in terms of just, I played a lot of Scrabble and, all these board games, things that you can get addicted to, and they can just soak up your time, right? And one of the friends I had at the time that, was involved in these so-called indulgences, he left early and went to America. By the time I met him several years later, right, he was in America, had come there, had gone to business school, and I was working in New York, and he came to see me, and he noticed that like I had been on this faith journey that had grown, and he asked me, just how did your faith evolve? How did this faith, where did it come from, right? And I remember a principle that I learned from that experience, which is just as part of your habit, just having this time when one really devotes to faith, right? Whether it's prayer and just just having a personal time, and then building on that, because that compounds over time. And I remember that because some call them holy habits, but habits can affect every part of your life, including your faith, as you know. So I've been at a session with Iyinoluwa where he talked about this. So maybe you might develop it further for this audience, like you did for the previous one, right? So that's one. But I think habits are very powerful, very powerful. This my mentor used to say, you first form habits and then your habits form you. And my wife tells me I'm a creature of habit. In other words, it's good to just have a few things that work for you and you do them as a matter of habit. So this Charlie talked about preparation. I generally think that preparation is something I take extremely seriously in terms of whatever I'm doing, and it has worked for me. Right from when I was a student, one of the things I learned early as a student is that, like, if you focus on preparation for the exams, it's not that I'm recommending not go to class, but if you focus on preparation for the exams, you will excel in the exams. Now, whether you did everything else right is a different matter. I remember going to medical school, like I told you, not a very good medical student, but I was all over the exams. I was just all over them. The way you study for it, you cram, I had a best friend from college. I read his notebooks. He still teases me to today. He's a top cardiologist in the States. But I was on the dean's list, the way. But I'll give it to habit, because if you make the investment, you get a result. Just that being present, the ability to pay attention when it matters, I think is just a big deal. I remember when I was doing my interview to go to work for Goldman Sachs as a business school student. I was super charged when I went to I wanted the job, and I literally knew I was going to get it, because just the intensity of my own sense of preparation and, the energy I took with me into the meeting. By the time I came out, something told me that this job was mine, right? And I will say that over and over again. It works for me. I'm a preacher. I'm a pastor. When I go to minister to people, I pray, but once I get on that stage, I am on it. Right? I am focused. I am there. I am present. I am linked to heaven, God, and I'm downloading. It has never failed, and it doesn't fail. That's why I'm so powerful on this gift of faith, because when you make it a habit, you find that it's very powerful. I've talked about a few other things, just in terms of discipline, personal discipline, which is really what habit is about. Because, once you form those personal discipline, whether it's, exercise and physical exercise, or prayer as in your faith, or preparation as in your work, I think those things will carry you very, very far. And people notice those things, right? So they also then start to help you. So that would be my takeaway, that when it comes to habits, take it seriously and focus on forming habits around the things that really matter to you. Make them a habit. Yeah.
Nicolas, I have one question for you, and then I would have to turn it over to the audience, because I know we have limited time with you, so I want to be respectful of your time. You've been a successful investor now on 3 continents, 2 of them emerging markets, in America, in India, in Latin America, and we're hoping one day you'll join us in Africa. So tell us, what is the secret? What is the secret that you've seen that is consistent with entrepreneurs that punch above their weight?
It's that question alone could be a whole book, but I'll try to answer it.
We've got to get a book out of you, Uncle Nick.
Yeah, I'll try to answer it as best I can. Now, as an entrepreneur myself, having been through that myself, I've learned some things as an entrepreneur, and then I'll talk about as an investor. When I became an entrepreneur initially, I thought I was a pretty smart guy and I knew a lot of things. And I became an entrepreneur and realized that I had no idea what I was doing. Because even though I had a lot of technical skills and I had moved up the rank at Intel and become a manager pretty quickly, when I got into entrepreneurship, I did not understand anything about things like product definition and how you define a product and how you evaluate the competitive landscape and go-to-market strategy and all kinds of terms that we know today, like MVP and all these things that you hear people throwing out. I had no knowledge of any of those things, and neither did my co-founders, by the way. So, we went in there with very good, strong technical skills, but really didn't understand anything about building a business. And we had to learn very, very quickly. And along the way, we made a lot of mistakes. But one of the things that I learned, and I believe is true today, has to do with the quality of the team that you put together. So when I look at investing, I'm not just looking at and investing only based on the team being strong today. But if the team is not strong, if the founders understand that the team is not strong and have a plan to build that team, then you could live with that. But when you go in and you see a weak team, but they believe it's a strong team, that could be very difficult to deal with, because everybody says things like, yeah, they want to learn from you and they want to learn from your experience, but that is not always true. That's what they say in order to get your money. But so understanding that the team is very important. And when I talk about the team, I think it's important for us to realize, and not all investors will admit this, but money is not what creates success. And many investors like to make it look like they're the reason for the success because they brought the money. But that is not true. Money doesn't create success, in my opinion. Money is a tool that the people with the intellectual capital use in order to create success. But the intellectual capital is really the key ingredient. The financial capital is necessary, but the key ingredient is intellectual capital. And intellectual capital is a combination of things. Intellectual capital is domain expertise. So understanding the area in which you're in, especially in the technology world, that's really important. It's experience, because if you're bright, you can solve a lot of problems when they happen. But if you have experience, you can often avoid those problems. So I look at things like the intellectual capital that is necessary to be able to do what these companies are trying to do, whether or not they understand the competitive landscape. So when people come and tell you things like they're the only ones doing something, that scares me, because oftentimes it's not true. There's almost never a situation where one company is the only one that recognizes a problem and is trying to solve it. Usually there are many other people who have recognized the problems and trying to solve it. They may be trying to solve it differently. If you have a good understanding of the competitive landscape, it is likely that you will know how to avoid some of the pitfalls that typically happen in investing. And then having a good strategy around market, because there are three major risks that I look at. One is, market timing risk. Is this the right time? When we started our company, Nchip, even though we had a successful exit, I will argue that we were about 20 years ahead of our time. We got, to some extent, we got lucky, but we were way ahead of our time. So timing, market timing is important. I think the technology risk in the technology business is one that one has to be careful of. Then there is execution risk, and execution risk comes with, avoiding execution risk has to do with experience and domain expertise and a lot of those things. But the other big risk that I think a lot of people make is underestimating the competitive response. And so understanding the competitive landscape is important. And I want to make one other point here, especially for people in Africa who are looking to do startups. There was a time not long ago when starting a business, especially in the developing world, and when you thought about the competition would likely to have been considered those who were, relatively close in geographical proximity. But that is no longer true. Today, the competition can come from anywhere, especially for tech or tech-enabled businesses. Businesses today, therefore, need to strive to be globally competitive. And you have to try to make sure that you understand how you can compete worldwide, not just how you compete with your neighbors down the street. And that will require things like excellence in product strategy, product quality, customer service, business models, and other business metrics. So we look at all of those things, because when you invest in the tech world, you have to be investing in a global business. You have, even if the customers may be local, the competition may not be local. So you have to think of this as a global business. So we evaluate the team and the business opportunity based on our thoughts about whether or not they can compete globally.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Uncle Nick. That was great. I'll just end with one quick question. And then if we can make it short so that we can take 1 or 2 questions from the crowd, that would be awesome. But I just want you to tell me one story from your life that really defined how you see the world today. One story, just one short story from your life that defines how you see the world today. Charlie.
I mean, many people say that in your life, you're either running away from something or you're running towards something. And I think it was only until recently that I realized like I was running towards something. And, I grew up in Kenya, and I moved from, as I said, I grew up in Kenya and then moved to the US. Part of what, maybe I don't talk a lot about why I moved to the US is because things kind of changed a little bit I grew up in, single family home. My dad passed on when I was about 6 years old, mostly raised by my mom. And, things were good most of the time until they were not. And the biggest reason I had to leave the US, leave Kenya and come to the US is because, things went really, really south, really, really fast. And, just seeing, sort of like my mom going through that, I came to the US, joining my big sister who was here, but I came in as a different person. She hadn't gone through that experience in Kenya. She left Kenya when we were under different circumstances. And for the longest time, my mission in life was to get my mom back to where things were okay. And 20 years later, even though we had surpassed that, I think it was just like 2 years ago that I realized, like, hey, I don't need to go to be chasing the same thing. Like, things are actually okay. And, the thing that it did for me is it brought clarity to my life in terms of what I needed to do. I understood opportunity cost of not focusing. And so I had a larger objective. When I was doing an internship, which was a fast-paying job at Toyota, they used to call me Old Man Toyota. And the reason they call me that is because I was an intern who was staying back, reading books, seeking all sorts of, I was very unapologetic in terms of looking for mentors. I just didn't care. I wanted to grow. I wanted to learn as much as possible. And part of that is like the thing that wasn't obvious when you looked at me was, the focus that was as a function of what I was trying to fix back home. And that stayed on, Toyota. It was just my forcing drive. And it wasn't until recently, because in spite of how much success I had in the US, I only measured success in terms of how things were back at home. In other words, how my mom was doing. And I didn't realize that was my drive until recently, because, when people ask me, like, what is the measure of success? And I'd say, like, how is my mom doing? All right. I don't care if I build 1,000 Tesla. If my mom is not driving a Tesla, I still have more work to do. So that was one experience. My mom kind of going through that just became the fuel to my fire. So I actually never shared that story with anyone. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that with us. Dr. Okey.
Thank you, Inyi. So, 2 quick stories come to mind, and I'll probably share both very quickly. One is, when I think about the defining experience of changing careers, right, from medicine to business, from medicine to accounting, one of the aha moments for me, which I think might be helpful to people, which is why I'm sharing it, is that I had put in 8 years in medicine, 6 years going through med school, internship, youth service as we used to do, actually 8 going to 9 years. But the thing that really helped me make the move was when I realized that I had 30, 40 years, 50 years of career ahead of me. I said, do I keep looking back at these 8, 9 years? Because my mates were going to America to, specialize. And it looked very tempting to do that. But I knew deep in my heart that I wanted to be in a business. I wanted to be in finance. And I'm glad that I decided to, put behind me the past, what accountants and financial analysts will call sunk cost. Even though when I look back now, it wasn't sunk because it's still helpful. But but that willingness to let go of the past, maybe that's part of what Charlie is talking about, and embrace what lies ahead, for me has been a principle in life. Whenever you find something is an issue, just make amends and move on. Because the worst mistake we always make is that you start trying to, like make up for whatever past mistakes and you compound them. So for me, that willingness to let go, like Paul would say, forgetting the things that are behind and pressing on to the things that are ahead, seeking perfection. So that's one. The second one is what I call propelled by adversity, a story. I graduated, probably one of the top people in my class who won the finance prize at Harvard Business School. So, whether you know it or not, you get into a bit of a bubble. You might not even know it. So I get to South Africa, we've raised this money. I went there as the person who had to raise the money with my partner in the States. And I thought I was walking on water. And then these guys brought me down to earth. South Africans are, what I call hardy people. They are just come out of apartheid. These are tough cookies. They just figured out very quickly that I had all this training in theory, but had never invested in my life. So, they gave me a very hard time. They were like, why are we teaching you and paying you at the same time? You should be paying us, right? And there was that whole struggle. And what made it was being a Black African, not Black South African, Black Nigerian in South Africa. They felt the white folks in South Africa were not too happy. They felt that like, you trained Blacks are trying to come and crowd us out of our country in the name of Black, whatever, right? Black empowerment is what they called it at the time. And then the Black South Africans were not happy either. They felt that like, we had went through all this struggle. Now that we've made the opportunity, so what are you guys coming here to do? So it was quite humbling and it was a difficult experience. But I tell you something, what I learned from that, because that's what propelled me to South African Capital Alliance. I started to, as South African, say, go north to South African Capital Alliance with my former mentor. So I think that adversity was a blessing in disguise because it pushed me into my destiny. If not, I thought I would be in South Africa for at least 10 years. Had a good life, good, everything that we were looking for. But, the fact that it wasn't comfortable meant that I had to look at opportunities further afield. And that's turned out to be a blessing. So I call it that the adversities can propel you forward. Yes.
Uncle Nick.
Yeah, well, throughout my life, I have had a very strong desire and motivation to be among the best in the world at whatever I did. For example, when I went to university, I didn't go to university to get a degree. To me, getting a degree just meant that if I stayed long enough, they'll give me a degree, even if it was just to get rid of me. So I was never really worried about those things. I went to university to learn and hopefully graduate as one of the top in my class, because that would give me a stepping stone to being the best at something. And when I went to graduate school, I wanted to focus on something where I could come out and be the best. I was never motivated by money, but I was motivated by success. But my definition of success has changed over the time. Like I said, it was never about money. I couldn't really define what it was. And it was only in the last decade or so that I truly started to realize what success means and how it should be measured. And I think success needs to be measured based on the impact that you have on the lives of other people. And so in everything I do today, whether it's investing, whether it's in my own charitable activities or in anything, it is really, I focus on what impact could I have on the lives of other people. So even when we built Flextronics, we talk about building a company that was $30 billion in revenue. For me, what I focus on more is the fact that we had over 300, almost 300,000 employees, and the jobs you were able to create and the families you're able to impact. And so for me, over my career, I have come to now realize what my purpose is on earth, and that is to impact the lives of other people in whatever opportunities I have.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Uncle Nick, for that. That's deep. So I'm going to take one or two questions, and we'll start with the people in this room. Does anybody have questions? And there's one from YouTube, because we're streaming this to YouTube as well. And there's a bunch of people watching YouTube. So yeah. Renee, you want to come up? Come and sit down in the green chair so they can see you. Come. Hurry up.
This way, but hello and thank you to the panelists. My name is Renee Gamal from Nairobi, Kenya. The question is to Nick. You said something about you've got to know when the timing is right. And we're told this so many times about when to take our product to market. Based on your experience and perhaps the one of the other panelists, how do you measure this rightness of the timing when you are in the situation and not in hindsight? Thank you.
Well, it's not always easy. Let me start by saying that it's not always easy. But I think there are two types of market opportunities. There are the market opportunities where the market exists and you're transforming an existing market. That one is usually easier to understand because the market is real and you're optimized and you're transforming that market. You're bringing new ideas and either expanding the market or changing the market. When you're building something brand new, where you're trying to create new opportunities, it's a little bit more difficult. For example, if you take Tesla, where Charlie spent a lot of time, Tesla was not the first company to try to do an electric car, but was the first successful company to do so. Apple was not the first company to invent an MP3 player, but was the first most successful company in doing so. So understanding market dynamics and market sentiment become very important. And I would say one of the key things I look for in a startup that would help me understand that is, do they have people within the startup who have an understanding of the market? Because if you're doing it thinking that if we build it, they will come, it's usually very much more difficult. If you're a technical person who is developing a technology, hoping to find an application, it's a lot more difficult than when you have a market that is looking for that application. So one of the things I look for is there proof in the market that people are looking for this and you're just making it easier and more convenient for them to be able to get access? Or is this something where there's no evidence in the marketplace that people are asking for this, but you're just hoping that if you develop it, they will want it? And so it's very difficult, but those are the kinds of questions that one has to ask themselves. Does the market exist and you're just making it easier and better for the market to get what it wants? Or are you trying to create something where you hope that the technology or the features will drive a new market? And that happens sometimes, but that's a lot more difficult. I don't know if Charlie or anybody else wants to add to that.
No, I think you covered all the things.
I don't know who else in the room. Let me just add one comment that relates more generally, because I've been asked this question, as you can imagine, countless times, but not necessarily in terms of ventures or creating new businesses, but even in terms of careers. What I have found, and this is again tied to a faith journey, is that most people get pushed. There are things that things happen that most people don't change when they're coasting. So there are things that disrupt, and it's looking at disruptions and what I call the reversals of life, the issues of life as opportunities of life. That's a very important journey of life. I remember once I was in a group of people who were, Christians, and they asked me, and I said, well, you pray and you get a leading, but on reflection, I realized that people actually, like the story I told you, people get pushed. If you look at the scriptures, people who moved were pushed. So adversity and this whole idea that it's not everything that not going as smoothly as possible that is bad news.
Yep. Adversity builds your business. Does anybody else have any other questions? Or let's take the YouTube question. Okay. While we're waiting for the YouTube question, does anybody else have any other questions? I have a question off of YouTube, which I have to read. It's by Karanja Mutahi. Question to Charlie and E. Well, maybe not me, maybe Nick. We've seen some trouble with the American growth for growth mindset, wasted capital, environmental impact, etc. Should Africa work towards a different model?
Can you repeat? Can you repeat, please? E?
We've seen some trouble with the American growth for growth's sake mindset. Wasted capital, environmental impact, etc. Should Africa work towards a different model? I think
Since they mentioned Charlie, let Charlie go first.
Okay.
I think it's a tough question because maybe I don't know that I completely agree. First of all, I know Karanja, so he's setting me up. Karanja Mutahi, and I know him from back in Kenya. I think like if overall, obviously there are down cycles, up cycles, but if you step back and look at overall what's happened today, I think I don't know that the sentiments have changed a lot. Still, we were just having this discussion actually as a partnership that growth is still one of the main metrics that correlates a lot to valuation of companies today. So I know what you're saying. Growth is no longer just the only metric. Like there's also a double click on your margins and things like that. So growth for sort of like other metrics is no longer just a thing to look at. So in that sense, should we? The question is, if the question is, should Africa learn, sort of like from other folks who are probably further ahead, in the ecosystem? I think the answer is 100% yes. But in that sense, I think the things that I've seen sort of like persevere, the cycles is, just either building companies just based on fundamentals. The question that we just talked about, whether it's, market timing, the problem, the size of the opportunity you're going after, the fundamentals haven't changed in terms of how people are thinking about companies. There are cycles and where, FOMO kicks in and people over-invest, and then they focus on just a few metrics as opposed to sort of like well-rounded metrics. And I think that will come and go. I think what I would hope for in terms of the future of, investing in Africa, he actually has a fantastic slide that it shows that we are where like sort of like US was back in the 70s or 80s, right? But it also shows that if you look at the number of unicorns that have been created, given the amount of investment in the region, like we're becoming more efficient. And so what I think we need to think about is how do we obviously learn and not just look at what is not working, but look at also what's working. We're in this business, especially the VC space and the early stage space, where people come into this space because you're optimistic, you're trying to make the future better. And it's always a power law. You're looking for the outliers that will have big impact. So I think there is, as much as, yes, you want to learn from some of the things that haven't worked, but you also want to focus on the things that have worked and make sure that we learn from that. So, from a context of Africa, I hope that's what we take on. I would really like to hear more of, conversations we've had here is companies, investors in the region with ambition to dominate the world and learning from other companies and startups that have here in the US. I see someone graduating from Stanford pitching me, they say we're starting in California and then we're going to dominate the world. And that level of ambition is the same thing that we need in the region as well.
So if I could add a couple of comments, if you don't mind, to that. I think
yes, of course.
I think first of all, we have to be careful about generalizing too much. I think while it is true that over the last few years, some investors have encouraged companies to focus more on market share and not operating discipline, which has led to some challenges. I think those of us, especially people who come from operating backgrounds, like Charlie and myself and others, when you come from an operating background, you understand that operating discipline is very important. And we also understand that growth and profitability are not mutually exclusive. So I don't think focusing on growth is a problem, but I do believe what the question suggests is definitely a problem. You don't just focus on growth and assume that growth and profitability are mutually exclusive, so you can't have profitable growth. Because at the end of the day, profitable growth is really what business is all about.
Yeah, profitable growth. That's a very, very important point that you've raised. I don't know if anybody else has any other questions, because we've taken. Okay, we've got one more question from YouTube. I think this will be our final question, except somebody raises their hand, because I want to let my ogas go because they have been so generous with their time. So there's a question now. Bayo Adio, he says, how does one identify, recruit, or persuade a mentor to be your mentor as a new founder? So how do you recruit mentors as a new founder? Charlie, Dr. Okey, do you want to take this one?
Well, I would like to hear Charlie and Nick, so let him go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I've sought, I've sought mentors, and I've been sought as a mentor. I think the first is know exactly what you want to get out of someone before you approach them. And that goes back to preparation, right? You sort of like there are two kinds of inbounds that you get. Is someone says, hey, I'd like 30 minutes of your time, and typically there is no agenda, no objective kind of outlined. And then there's the second category, which is actually what works, is like, hey, here's where I'm trying to go, or here's a particular area where I'm kind of stuck. And I think because of your experience, meaning I've taken the time to actually look at, either someone's background, and, because of XYZ about your background, I think you'd be the best person. And by the way, majority of the time, you'll find people will be generous with their time when it's clear what you need from them. So I think, be shameless, shameless in terms of pursuit, but take the time to actually prepare, right? And then what I will say is majority of the time is you need continuity. Mentors is not about like a one-time sort of like this transaction. It's actually relationship. It's about building a long-term relationship, because if a mentor has context, they're able to add actually more value. And so follow-up is the other part. There are very many people who are good at just the one time, but then do they follow up? And follow-up is good in many ways, because one, it creates a level of accountability, right? You've spoken to someone, then they follow, sort of like you agree on some action items, and then you follow up. So it creates that level of accountability. So I say that's part of being persistent as well, and consistent. So I think that's what's worked for me. And then I've always said, like, cast a wide net. Don't pick the obvious sort of like people who'd be, and what I mean by obvious is someone who's followed your exact career path will probably have the same blind spots that you do. And so sometimes think outside the box, follow people who are sort of like have followed a different path. And then the other part is if you do, which has always been the pleasant surprise I've always had. It's amazing that there are people you think of, like when you think of who would be the ideal mentor, there are people you have in your mind, you're like, oh my God, if I could get 20 minutes with these people, but you think that they're too busy to do it. Actually start with those people. Start with the people that you think, so dream big in terms of even pursuing mentors, because in many ways they will also provide, like, sort of like define a ceiling or be the enabler. And sometimes those dream people, you find actually the busier people are the people who are also willing to spend time and allocate their time, and they'd be most effective. Like, meaning if you're getting 1 minute of their time is more valuable than someone else. So be ambitious as well and dream big when you're pursuing mentors.
That's it. Nicolas, did you want to add something, Uncle Nick?
Yeah, I would say first of all, I think it's important to recognize there's a difference between a mentor-mentee relationship and just seeking advice from people. So I think one should always seek advice from as many people as you can, broaden your perspective, broaden your inputs. You can then analyze and decide how to leverage the advice you get. But specifically with regards to a mentor-mentee relationship, it starts with you having to recognizing what your weaknesses or blind spots are, and trying to find a relationship with somebody who will help you turn those weaknesses into strengths, and somebody who can help you even recognize your blind spots. I think a good mentor-mentee relationship means finding someone who actually cares. So it's not, and I think Charlie hinted at that, it's not just about the relationship, that the notoriety of that individual or whatever, but you need to find someone who cares, because the more the person cares, the more they'll spend time thinking about what advice they give you and making sure they give you the right advice for your situation. You also need to find someone who shares your vision for what it is you're trying to accomplish, because that will determine how much effort they put in. And I'll give you share a piece of advice that my pastor gave me over 20 years ago, which is the best business advice I've ever gotten, even though it didn't come from a business person. And he was giving me advice as I was recruiting people to build a new business. And he said this to me, and it applies to everything that I've done since then. He said, when God gives you a vision, you are not the only person that he shared that vision with. And your job is to go find the other people he shared the vision with, because when you find those people, then you're going to be building the right team for what it is you're trying to do. And I think that applies to mentorship as well. And then on the back end, one has to demonstrate gratitude and appreciation for the time and effort the mentor is putting in. And the way you do that is by following up and demonstrating that you're taking action, and based on the advice and feedback that you get.
Amazing. Thank you very much. I know our time is fast spent, and you spent more time than we've budgeted. So I just want to close now with last words.
So Inyi, no, hold on, Inyi.
Okay, yes,
Inyi, can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
No, I want to add a couple of things on the. I want to add a couple of things on the mentoring, because it's something obviously I've given quite a fair amount of thought to. One is to underscore the point that's been made, that it's a relationship, it's a mentorship journey, and there are some things to look out for in that journey to see if you're optimizing mentoring. One is look out for the growth in the journey, growth in the mentorship, and that growth should be measured by your contribution, right? You might start off being this, you're looking up to this person, like Charlie said, and all that. But for me, the great mentoring relationships are the ones that evolve and grow, where the mentee increasingly becomes relevant, useful, valuable to the mentor, right? And at some point, you might even become more valuable to the mentor than he is to you, just because you've grown, you are contributing. You know, the Bible says it's more blessed to give than to receive. I have seen that evolution. I saw that evolution in my great mentors over time. And that's something that is actually a beauty to watch. And then finally, I would say that, this point that Nick made should not be underestimated, which is that, like, it's not a one-time, it's the fact that you actually want to grow over time. So it's tied to that growth process. And the fact that, like, and it's not one mentor, but it's a journey where you might have different mentors because of the journey you are on. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Dr. Okey. That was very important. So I'm just going to go for final words, so that we can give you back. We can give you, well, I think we've taken extra time actually at this point. So we're not giving you back any time, but we're praying that God will give back blessings. So we're gonna start with Charlie. Let's start with Charlie. Final words. For this is a room of young Africans that are about to go on demo day. They've all built incredible businesses. I'll send you a link to demo day. I know you can't be here. Tell us, what is your final charge to them?
I've seen a couple of and you asked this in your questions, and I've received quite a bit of inbound from founders in the region and pitch. And The one thing I'd wish, and for all of you, and I challenge you on this as well, is we touched on this, is to dream big. We need to be unapologetic, and I say unapologetic, unapologetically African, and that doesn't also mean that the extent of our dreams need to be limited to the region. And what that means is there are many times I've come up, with founders, amazing founders who are pitching a technology that I think could dominate the world, and for some reason, unspoken reason, we're not allowed to dream beyond the continent, and that needs to change. And I urge you guys to do that because people are doing that here. And it's interesting, even Africans here are doing it, right? Like I see an African who's just graduated from a university here pitching me, and they're building a company here, and their goal is, they're dreaming to dominate the world. That same person pitching me from the region somehow limits themselves to the region. So I urge you to be ambitious beyond just the borders of the region. Obviously, starting in the region is important. The other last thing I'd like to share is probably one of the most impactful frameworks that a mentor, we're talking about mentors, shared with me, and I've used it throughout my career, and it's been super important. And I think for aspiring, founders, maybe super powerful. And he said, like, always optimize for 4 things. And the first thing is, don't optimize for money, optimize for passion. Make sure that whatever you're doing is something that you're passionate in the mission, you're passionate about the role that you're playing, right? As Nick said, there are many people who are given the same dream that you're doing. Just make sure you're partnering with people on a journey where you're passionate about what you're pursuing. The second thing, in addition to passion, is being valued. Make sure you're spending time, you're working with people who value you for the skills that you bring. And if you actually get people who are passionate about the same thing, they're more likely to value the skill sets that you bring, the experience that you bring. And the third thing is make sure you put yourself in an area where you're always adding value, outsized value. For you guys as founders, obviously that is super powerful, but also, just make sure you're solving problems that actually mean something to you and actually mean something to society. You're having a positive impact. And the fourth, and probably the most important, is put yourself in a situation where you're learning. The irony about that is it's always the uncomfortable position, putting yourself in an uncomfortable position. Life looks like, many people come to me and ask, hey, how your career looks like an S-curve. That's actually not true. When you zoom in, it's a small series of S-curves. It's a series of small S-curves. And when jumping from one S-curve to the other, it always looks like you're going backwards. But the key there is understanding when one S-curve is asymptoting and identifying a new S-curve. And when you jump from one to the other, you look like an idiot to most people, right? So this is where we were talking about having conviction and taking risks. And the thing that you can optimize for, what I found in jumping from one S-curve to the other, is asking yourself, where am I going to learn the most? And by definition, that's not the well-trodden path. It's always like an offbeat path and something that's not popularly taken. And so, I ask you, don't accept anything but 4 out of 4. Every day doesn't feel, maturity is that every day doesn't feel like 4 out of 4. But if you're in a situation where you feel like you don't have 4 out of 4 for a long time, it means you need to make a change.
Fantastic. Thank you, Charlie. Uncle Nick, or should we go Uncle Nick, and then I want Dr. Okey to close us off. Uncle Nick?
Sure. So specifically for many of the people who would be involved in this, I'd like to share the following. I would say 80% of the global population live in developing countries, which are countries from the regions we come from. And it's a market that's been largely ignored by by many business sectors, but it's a market with unique requirements, and it's a market that will likely be successfully tackled by companies coming out of regions such as the ones we are from. So what I'm saying is, we come from a market that is big. Don't just think about Africa. Africa itself is a big market, but there are other areas of the world whose market dynamics are very similar to Africa and whose requirements are also very similar. So I agree with Charlie that we should think big as we look at these opportunities to start new businesses. But we should recognize that the developing world is emerging as a major market opportunity. And I think there's a significant opportunity to build very large, meaningful businesses by focusing on the markets, the areas of the world that we've come from, that others have largely ignored. And I believe that it is likely that over the next decade or so, we can see some large global players coming out of the developing world that initially started by focusing on the needs of these areas. I think in the medical, the bioconvergence space, the medical space, and others, there are great opportunities there. Financial services, there's another great opportunity there. And I know you've had some experience in that space and demonstrating that this is true. So I encourage the entrepreneurs to think big, as Charlie mentioned, but think big doesn't mean you have to be thinking America and Europe. It means think about solving big problems. And we have lots of big problems in the developing world that we can solve and build great businesses from. And these are markets we understand better than anybody else and should be able to be more competitive in.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Uncle Nick. Dr. Okey, close us off since you're here with us locally.
Thank you, Inyi. First, let me say, this has been an amazing panel. I've taken notes. I've really enjoyed listening to Nick and Charlie. And I can tell you, being somebody that my own business is invested in people who, will make you successful. These are clearly winners, just in terms of the quality of what they've shared. And Inyi, thank you for putting it all together. Which takes me to my final word, which is really opportunity. I like to look at life through the prism of opportunity. Even in coming here, I was asking myself, Inyi asked me to come, but I have no doubt that just by being present, I can't think of a better way to have spent the last 1.5 hours, right? Just because I've learned so much. So I love opportunity. I love looking at life through the prism of opportunity. And I think that if you focused on opportunity from the point of view of saying that you want to make the most of opportunity that will come your way, you will go a long way. And part of it is that these opportunities come disguised, right? As we've had today. They won't come screaming opportunity. They may come screaming challenges or reversals or something like that. But, just know that life will give you your fair chance of opportunity. And if you make the most of them, you will be the next Nick and the next Charlie and the next EA.
Thank you so much. Thank you. I am so grateful that let's give them a round of applause. Now let's give them a round of applause. And thank you so much for making time, for giving us extra time, for sharing from the depths of your hearts. I'm very grateful, and I hope we can make you proud, so that you guys, hopefully next year we have you here in person. We'll roll out the red carpets, and I'm sure Dr. Okey will still be here, so he'll make sure he hosts us with you. Thank you so much again. I'm very grateful. So
thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Have a wonderful evening. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, guys. We can go back to party.